Now, I love young people. I've been a passionate teacher all my life. And now adults, young people, students, professors are faced with this. You've got to choose between science and God. If you want to be regarded as an intelligent person in a scientifically literate age, you've got to give up on God. And this is coming from Hawking, who ought to get the Nobel Prize. If they discover Hawking radiation, he probably will. And I was bothered. I couldn't understand. How do you get to that? You've got to choose between science and God. And I used to think, and I still do, as I'll explain in a moment, that the problem was his understanding of science. But then I suddenly realized the bigger problem is his understanding of God. Now, try to follow me carefully. When I was young, about a century ago, it feels that sometimes even more, but there we are. When I was young, if I used the word God in public in Ireland or England, people understood that what I was talking about is the God of the Bible, the eternal creator and sustainer of the universe. But that's no longer the case. So much pressure has been brought to bear to get the God of the Bible relegated to the sort of God you got in Greek, Babylonian, Egyptian, or Assyrian religion, the gods of the pantheon. So that when we talk about God, many people, including Hawking, as I shall demonstrate in a moment, think that that's what we're talking about. Now follow me as I describe to you such a God. Let's think of the Greek god of lightning. They didn't understand lightning, they were afraid of it. And so this is a god behind it. But you do a bit of atmospheric physics at this university here, and that god disappears. Because it was a god of the gaps. It really amounts to saying, I can't explain it, therefore a god did it. That is what many of our contemporaries, ladies and gentlemen, think is the Christian position. Now, I must talk from within my own understanding of things. And I see here's a massive problem. You see, gods of the gaps disappear with advancing science. In that sense, science has buried many gods, and thank God it's so. Many gods, because those ancient gods are deifications of the forces of nature. And one of the world experts on the gods of the ancient Near East, in which I'm massively interested because I've just written a book about them that's been mentioned, he said this: there's a vast difference between the gods of all the ancient mythologies and the God of the Bible, in that the gods of all those mythologies were products of the original primeval stuff of the universe. They were actually material gods. They were, I quote, descended from the heavens and the earth. Then he says the God of the Bible created the heavens and the earth. You can't put them in the same category. That's the first point. But secondly, the God of the Bible is not a God of the gaps. I'm sure most of you have heard the first sentence from Genesis. In the beginning, God created the bits of the universe we don't understand. No, but that's what many people think. That God is put there as a kind of placeholder. I can't explain it, therefore God did it. But when I can explain it, we won't need God. That's very simplistic and naive, ladies and gentlemen. The God of the Bible created the whole show, the heavens and the earth, the bits we do understand and the bits we don't. And in fact, it was the bits that Newton did understand that increased his faith in God. Isn't that true of you? The more you understand of painting, the more you can admire the genius of a Rembrandt, not the less. The more you understand of engineering, the more you can admire the workings of a turbofan jet, not the less. And so it was with Newton as he found the law of gravity. He didn't say, oh, I've got an explanation, I don't need God. No, he said, what a brilliant God to do it that way. And he wrote the Principia Mathematica and dedicated it at the beginning in the hope that a thinking person would come to believe in God through it. That's the right way round. Now, do you follow me? Now, here's the crucial logic. If you think that God is a God of the gaps, You have to choose between science and God because that's the way you've defined God. In other words, I believe that many of these new atheists, so-called, are telling people to choose between science and God because they got a primitive, thoroughly pagan concept of God. Now, that may surprise some of you, but it helps me explain a lot of what's going on. That's the theological side of it. But of course, there's another side to it. There's a scientific side. You see, why did Newton not abandon God when he found gravity? For a very simple reason. He didn't think that God is the same kind of explanation as a scientific explanation. Why is the water boiling? Well, it's boiling because the heat energy from the flame is being conducted through the base of the copper kettle, and that's stimulating the molecules of water. They're moving faster and faster. That's why it's boiling. Is it? No, it's boiling because I would like a cup of tea. Now, why are you laughing? Well, you're laughing because I'm talking nonsense. Which of the two reasons is the correct one? Both. And you need both. The scientific explanation and the personal agent explanation. Now tell me, which is the more important one? People have been making tea for millennia without knowing anything about the science of heat. It's actually the personal one. Now that's a very simple illustration. I find kids can understand it, but a lot of scientists can't. It's utterly astonishing. They say the science is the only explanation you need. That's nonsense. Now, follow this. My two explanations of the water boiling don't conflict. They don't compete. They complement. They're two different kinds of explanation, but now comes the crunch. You need both of them. Let me give you another illustration because this is such an important thing. God no more competes with science in explaining the world than Henry Ford competes with the law of internal combustion in explaining a motor car. And so, I'm afraid many of these new atheists are just talking sheer nonsense because they don't understand the nature of explanation. It's worse than that. When we hear somebody say, science explains, you've heard people say that. And what do we think? For instance, I was taught the law of gravity at school. We might as well stick with that. We're on gravity tonight. It keeps us on the ground, you know. What was I taught about the law of gravity? Do you know what I thought at school? I thought it explained gravity. It doesn't, you know. Nobody knows what gravity is, not even today. And if you don't believe me, read Richard Feynman. You see, the law of gravity is brilliant. It gives us a mathematical way of calculating the motion, say, of the planets and so on. It enables us to land a person on the moon even without Einstein's corrections. It's wonderful, but it doesn't tell us what gravity is. Newton realized that. Non fingo hypothesi, he wrote. I don't make hypotheses. I don't know what gravity is. But here's a mathematical description of how it works. I think Wittgenstein, the great philosopher, put it best when he said, the great delusion of modernism is that the laws of nature are explanations of the phenomena of nature when they're not. They are descriptions. They're not explanations. So what's that saying? It's saying when we say the law of gravity explains, it doesn't explain everything, even at the scientific level. The nature of explanation is very different from the popular understanding of it, and this is so important. The God explanation doesn't conflict with a scientific explanation, mostly answering completely different questions, as we've seen. So the idea that science can bury God begins to look more and more foolish.